Hello and most welcome to 1329 of the Heidegger series. I will continue today with Tracy Marks' fantastic article. And I will continue where I left off. At page 35, fractal geometry as a bridge between realms. And we were talking about clouds. Clouds can be conceived as zero-dimensional points that occupy three-dimensional space. Coastlines are one-dimensional lines that occupy two-dimensional planes. Mountains are two-dimensional surfaces draping a three-dimensional world. Quaternions are products of the hypercomplex plane consisting of one real and three imaginary axes. If imaginary numbers do relate to abstract processes in consciousness, and more specifically to the fuzzy zone between mind and body, inner and outer processes, then because they are three-dimensional shadows of four-dimensional space, quaternions may provide some clues as to the internal landscape of higher dimensional thought. To understand this, imagine a pink elephant dancing. and you will be manipulating a three-dimensional image through the fourth dimension of time. To calculate fractal or Hausdorff dimension, one of a number of two ways to measure fractal dimensionality. A log-log relationship estimates the rate at which more information becomes available. As we shrink the size of our measuring device. Here a kind of magic becomes evident in the unexpected relationship that emerges between the observer and observed. That is between measuring stick and that which is measured. Unlike finite objects, where resolution of measurement is possible, because fractal objects partake of the infinite, they exhibit a paradoxical quality. The smaller the measuring stick, the larger the measurement. Because the quantity of measure continually alters relative to the size of the yardstick. Fractal dimension is not only a measurement of quantity, as we usually conceive it. Instead, fractal dimension represents a portmanteau that also indicates the quality of relations between observer and observed. Since fractal dimensionality signals what remains constant as we change scales, another paradox soon becomes evident. fractal pattern simultaneously appears on all scales. At the same time that it demonstrates no characteristic scale. A quality called scale invariance. Paradoxical boundaries. The imaginary numbers are a wonderful flight of God's Spirit. They are almost an amphibian between being and not being. Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. Although mountains and rivers appear to be stable things to our Western mind, they are actually continually moving processes that evolve dynamically on various timescales. The fiction of stability and thingness is reified by the English language with its predominance of nouns acting on and acted upon by verbs. The dynamism of fractals as processes in nature seems much more consistent with American Indian languages. Where features such as lightning and coastlines are described using verbs. As embodied in nature, fractals occupy the complex interface between chaotic forces such as wind, water, and heat, comprising the weather. They represent the place where time gets etched into structure through process. Fractal dynamics pervade our bodies. Occupying zones of openness, communication and transportation between various subsystems of the body. As well as between the body and the outside world. Blood circulates throughout the body in the fractal branching of arteries and veins. The lungs cycle oxygen in and carbon dioxide out through fractal bronchioles. Even the ion channels in our cells and the neural pathways in the brain, our main organ for perception and communication, are fractal. Self-similar dynamics also pervade psychophysics. In that physical stimuli outside our bodies often follow power laws. Which transmute into just noticeable differences in sensation and perception. In human physiology generally, as in nature broadly, fractals function in open systems as boundary keepers. Both by separating and connecting various subsystems and levels of being. Skin pores, wrinkles, and other markings on the sacs in which humans and other animals are enclosed are usually fractally distributed. Facial wrinkles are a good example of how time can get etched into space through fractal form at the outer edge of our bodies. Whereas babies all have smooth faces, all the people get uniquely lined. Brows furrowed with worry and mouths framed by laugh lines allow us to read the social history of a person. In this way, self-similar wrinkles engrave characteristic muscle patterns related to emotional response and expression throughout life. Wrinkles reveal fractals at the interface between mind and body, psychological and physical levels. Likewise, fractals in the brain's neuronal branches and recursively embedded circuits mediate similar space between subjective and objective processes. Mathematician Manfred Schroeder opened a door for analyzing fractals symbolically, through which cyberneticist Ron Eglash, among others, now walk. Eglash describes self-similar patterns in Dogon culture based upon the human form as the unit of meaning. As well as illustrates fractals in African settlement patterns. Physicist cyberneticist Nicoletta Sala demonstrates that fractal geometry, in particular the self-similarity, is present as an aesthetic property in all cultures. for example, in African, Mesoamerican, Western, Japanese, Chinese, Hindu, and Islamic cultures. She also analyzed the fractal components in different architectural styles as unconscious or conscious acts of design. This kind of geometry finds application for generating virtual worlds. Elsewhere, I have detailed the existence of fractals at a more abstract, symbolic level within the human psyche. In the paradoxical intersubjective space between self and other. Fractal dynamics become evident in human behavior as personality traits manifest in self-similar patterns at multiple scales of social observation. An aggressive person may push others aside verbally with overtalk, push ahead of others physically in bank and other lines, while pushing self-oriented needs ahead of others in significant relationships. In the clinical sphere, fractals are evident in the frequent mirroring of content in process, as well as within common therapist lore that the entirety of a patient session or even psychoanalysis can be gleaned from a first utterance or dream. The fractal self is multiply embedded within different scales of social observation. Each of us has a proto-self that is biologically driven and precedes consciousness. we have an intrapsychic self revealed by dreams and unique patterns within our intrapsychic landscape. And we possess a national identity that contrasts with people from other countries. Possibly, we possess a global identity opened up by high-tech communication that allows instant access over the world. Generally speaking, self-similar dynamics appear in the joints, in the space between levels, not only does identity in nature appear fundamentally fractal, where self-similarity captures scale-invariant patterns as well as scale-variant irregularities and discontinuities. But also, fractals are prevalent in the psyche, where identity is constituted intersubjectively by endless feedback loops in the space between self and other, inside and outside. Within the psyche, scale invariance allows us to operate psychologically on all size and time scales, while self-similarity carries our characteristic stamp of uniqueness and wholeness. To each facet of symbolic and social operations. And I think scale invariant we remember all the way back to Julian Barber, says the universe is in itself scale invariant. Here the same thing is explained in different manner, but it does amount to similar things. Julian Barber mentioned that there is no measuring line, objectively and transcendental in the universe. In fractality, one can understand scale invariance as iteration, a term oddly enough also used by the French philosopher Jacques Derrida. He talks about iteration, a small difference, everything is uttered once more, in comparison to the regular, more Newtonian paradigmatic repetition, where everything is thought to be exactly the same in essence, only repetition. I will continue next time. Maybe there are some questions.
It was very interesting about the measuring device, that if we shrink the size of our measuring device, also the information,
Information, knowledge.
Also shrinks, or no, it doesn't shrink, but it becomes, how should we say? Information cannot shrink, or cannot.
Well, with a smaller measuring device, the coast of England, for instance, gets longer fractally. And with a longer measuring device, it gets shorter.
I don't get it.
Yes, it is how it is. I'll show you later. And that shows one can compare the measuring device with the self, the observer, and one can compare the coastline of England or whatever one chooses to study or interact with. And do notice the information is also similar. There is a parallel there. So with a smaller measuring device, there will also be, oddly enough, more information coming from the coast of England, and to that matter, every other thing. And this is Terry Marks-Tarlow point when she, in a most elegant manner, and I will not mention that today because I will need a graphic presentation, but she shows how the observer / measuring stick interacts and thereby change reality, but also making it more objective. Going more into the coastline of England, or whatever it might be, we get more knowledge, and more knowledge is more shareable. It is knowing on all different dimensions. I could actually say that knowledge is also scale invariant. It doesn't take scale, as it of course does in the Newtonian paradigm. There we, for each study, get the same amount of knowledge. And that takes away the object and the observer. Anything more?
No, I have a comparison of my own. So if you, in a laboratorium, if you take this old-fashioned, what they call them?
Microscope?
Yes, and if you take something small, you look at something small, it becomes bigger. So in this way, it makes sense that the small measuring device and the small object also becomes bigger. Perhaps. Would you agree? It's not.
Yeah, the microscope is somehow, and well, yeah, yes. This is called zooming in. Microscope is often connected to the Newtonian paradigm, but it holds there too. The more you will see, and do remember that the microscope itself is not out of the picture. It is partaking. How? Well, inside the microscope there are measuring devices that are in themselves fractal. We have at least 20 lenses in a microscope. They are all different and they're not perfectly shaped either. So they are interacting into what we are seeing. But what could happen if you do work with the microscope long enough, you forget that they are all unique, which they are. And then you can universalize the idea that knowledge is always the same. This is very keenly avoided in Terry's article. I say thank you very much and have a very pleasant afternoon. Bye bye.
Excellent.